Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Today's going to be one of those darkroom videos, and it's going to be the Cambo wide negatives that I got from the previous video, printing videos. I got 6 negatives, but only 5 are different shots, so I'm going to probably be printing 3 of them on 8x10, which is not a huge enlargement. It's a 2 times enlargement. But I rather keep the size of the prints smaller so it's easier for you guys to buy and ship. Because if I make them very big, the shipping, they just bash the envelopes and such. So it's Kodak Tmax 100. And I'm going to be printing once again on Ilford multi-grade warm tone paper, fiber base. And I'm just getting some Adox paper, but it still hasn't come. So this is probably going to be maybe one of the last times I print on that warm tone for the YouTube channel. I might keep the warm tone every now and then, but I just want to keep you guys, saying that I'm going to be using Adox probably. So Cambo wide 4x5 on 8x10. So let's get it all started. So I'm changing the lens from 80mm, which is what I did the 35, to a 135. If you're curious about what format or what lens covers what format on an enlarger, it's basically the normal size. So whatever is the standard lens for a format, that will be the enlarger lens of choice. So in 35, it's usually a 50. I use an 80 because my enlarger is an 8x10 and I can't use a 50 because it needs a really deep cone. So it's fine to use a longer lens but not a shorter lens unless it's a wide angle version, which is pretty rare to see. This one's a 135, so this will be the one I use for the 4x5 enlargements because the 80mm won't actually cover the whole format. So I'm changing it to a 135, probably going to stop it down a few stops, which is usually the sweet spot for enlarging lenses, and then adjust the time and the contrast accordingly to the 4x5. Another thing is the Tmax 100 has a very smooth tone of grays, and I like more contrasty, punchy negatives and prints. So I did develop an HC 110 in B, which is already pretty strong developer, but I will try to maybe push the contrast a little more. Also, the lens I used on the Cambo wide was a 65mm, and a 65mm without a center filter does a small vignetting, and you'll see it on the print. I'll do a print without any correction, and then I'll show you how I actually correct some of the vignetting on the print, because you can do is the other, like a counterclockwise or counteracting the vignetting by doing a circle and burning the center instead of or dodging the sides, so you burn the center basically and you get an even exposure throughout the print. A black and white film doesn't do so much, but if you were shooting slides with a super wide, you really need that center filter. Black and white color negative are usually fine. You can correct it either in post or you can correct it in the enlarger. As you can hear, you got the stops, but you also declick them if you want. So you see, that's sort of declicked, sort of, and this is clicked. So wide open to start with. So I just did the first contract print, and as you can see here, this is the first time, this little strip here. Then we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So total 6 exposures. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this one should be whitish, so I feel like the contrast might be too low. I started at contrast 2 and went in fourths of stops all the way up. So I'm going to give it a higher contrast, maybe all the way up to 3, and start a lower time. I am at f16 because this is a very strong light source from the enlarger. It has 1,200 watts. So I'm gonna go for maybe f16 and a half, or I mean a half a slot more than f16 towards f22, and I'm gonna go for a higher grade and see how that looks. As you can tell, this is the first test print. This is the second test print at grade 3. There's already a bigger separation between the whites and the blacks. Here we actually have the negative that hasn't been exposed, and it's still sort of grayish, so I'm guessing that the white will be hard to get because this was in the shadow and overcast, so it's not going to be like a pure white. The pure white's going to be more on the lamp here and maybe the sky in certain areas, but I'm gonna go for maybe a tad higher grade to try to give it a bit more separation. Plus, when it darkens, you know, fiber-based paper used to has a dry down, so what looks whitish now will turn into a muddy gray. So we want to make sure that the whites are preserved, and the darks, you know, we can control them with dry down too. So far stopped down to f16, halfway to f22, which I don't know, 18.5 I guess, something like that. And we'll see, because this one was a screw up, but this is step by step, and fourth of a step at grade 3. So I'm gonna go for grade 3.5 and see what the time is. It's too short. This is 10 seconds, and I find it a little too short for what I usually do. So when you have the issue I'm having where there's too much light and you're going to f22, which is not the ideal aperture for printing, you can use neutral density filters for your enlarger lens, or you can also add the same amount of filtration throughout the filters. So instead of going for like a 3256 filtration, you can add cyan and maybe say 50 units, 50 more, 50 more, and that way it's also sort of like a neutral density filter, which is something I'm going to do because I feel like there's too much light coming through, and I like having a bit more than 10 seconds because for dodging or burning it's too quick, and it doesn't let you work comfortably. So we're going to just go ahead and do that. Also, you could do is what I told you before, you can change the lens and have a longer lens, so you have the head higher. The higher the head is, the more time you're going to have to use to expose the same piece of paper. So if I put this head really high with a 300mm lens, I could cut down the times, actually no, and like make the times longer to print the paper for the same exposure that I want on the finished print, if that makes any sense. So after including the neutral density filter instead of the filtration to cyan, I did another test strip, and this one was pretty good. So what I did is I blow dried it with a hair dryer to make it do the dry down so I could judge when it's dry. I gave it a blast and decided that it was not the base exposure, but 1, 2, 3 steps down. So it's this middle strip, which this is fourths of a stop, so you can barely see them. But this is a first test strip or like base exposure for the whole print. I actually quite like it. The whites on the walls maybe are a little dull, but this is how it looked in that daylight, and the sky was just cloudy and overcast. So I kind of like the base exposure total. I'm not going to play around too much because it will darken a little bit later down when it dries. So I'm going to make a few copies of this and then move to the next one. Hey guys, so I just made a second contact print for the second different image. This is the one that actually has a cat here in the corner. You can probably barely see it because it's dark. I went from lighter to darker. And when you're doing contact prints, I started with the base time I had in the previous print. And I took a few stops down, and I forgot to stop it down to f16 and a bit more, so it was an f16. So the first was not good because it was way too light. Half a stop actually made quite a difference. And the second one I went to f16 and a half a stop more. And this is the base exposure minus a few stops, just to take, well, not minus a few stops, minus a few steps. And then I went from there slowly all the way here. So that's why the cat on this strip is really dark, plus it was a black cat. So I dried it with a blow dryer so you could see, and actually it's starting to look fairly good already at maybe 1 or 2 stops into the frame. So this is the base exposure, and then 1 stop, 2 stops, and then we'll see. So I'm gonna go in there and do one whole print probably at 2 stops in, so this one here, the corner of the building, and do a whole print. I usually do a one whole print with that base exposure and then decide if I want to burn, dodge, or anything. So far I haven't really dodged or burned much because these are 4x5s and they have a lot of detail and there's a lot of tonality, so usually you don't need to do so much. The smaller the enlargement, or I mean the smaller the negative or the bigger the enlargement from where you're starting, the more you need to dodge and burn. So if I was doing, instead of an 8x10, maybe a 20x24 inch print, I would probably have to dodge and burn a lot more to get the same tonality I get here. The bigger you're enlarging, the more loss on tonality you're going to get on the paper. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first base print and see how that comes out. So after doing that whole print at basically this grade here, this part of the building that's in a higher tone comes out totally blown out. So you can use your contact print to determine how much more you have to burn here. So considering we're starting here, I have to go counting steps 1, 2, 3, 4 steps of light. So I can give it this base exposure and that 4 steps to burn this to detail, because in the one that right now is in the water, it looks completely blown out and kind of fakeish. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to count those steps, give it a burn at the same grade because I kind of like how it looks there. So you can see it there. It actually looks fairly good there. So I'm going to do that and burn this little bit of the building. And then there's a cable that you probably can't see with the camera, but there's a cable here which also disappears if it doesn't get burned. So I'm going to burn this basic strip and this little triangle here too to kind of give it a bit more tone. So just did the final third print test strip, and this time we're going from here to that way. So first base strip or base exposure, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm gonna go for the 4th because I do like a bit of detail on the whites, because this is actually just painted white, but it's, let's say, like a dirty white. So this strip is the one I'm gonna go for. I probably won't get a lot of detail here because this was totally burned out, and under the roof there's probably not a lot of detail because that's a few stops back. So pretty much everything is going to get the same exposure. I think it's going to not require any burning or dodging at all here, so we'll see. But this is the third and last print. As I said, these are 8x10 prints. I usually make a series of 5 and offer them on my Squarespace, or actually my website, which is a Squarespace store. So those who want to, help with the channel, they can purchase these prints. They're fiber-based. This one's curled because I just dried it quickly to show you guys and see how that goes. I washed them for an hour and all that. Everyone that's bought the previous print of the Japan Camera Hunter and the Street Pan and the Leica MDA, thank you so much. There's still a few prints in the store if you like those better. These are 4x5s printed on an 8x10. And if you have any questions on printing, I've been drying down a bit so I can guess the exposure better. As I said in the last video, I wasn't sure of the dry down percentage, so I'm just doing this every single print, is drying it quickly, seeing it. This one's dry so I can judge the exposure properly. But yeah, anyone that has any questions about darkroom printing or anything like that, please let me know. I'm no expert, but I'll try to help. And those who buy the prints, thank you so much. I just shipped my first few yesterday, so I'm very excited to see when the people receive them and if they like them and such. But yeah, if you have any recommendations of what you want to see in the darkroom, there is going to be a video, because remember in the video that I shot these, I totally messed up this one. You can see that this one has a nice exposure. There's a nice difference between the highlights and the dark areas. And this one's overexposed 5 stops. I developed it normal. I didn't do anything to try to rescue the picture. So I'm going to try to print this one and get fairly decent results. So that's going to be a messed up image trying to fix it. I know that scanning you can do it because I scanned it and I posted it on the video when I was shooting out and about. But I'm going to do a video on printing this. So yeah guys, thanks so much for watching. Thank you for Camera Store for sponsoring this video, and see you in the next one guys.